Hey folks, this is Kalani. We got some awesome news. We will get 7.1.5 on the 10th of January, then Nighthold in Normal and Heroic on the 17th, and then Mythic and Looking for Raid the week after. So all that seems to be set in stone now. We actually have release dates. So that means that 7.1.5 is coming on this very next Tuesday, which is fantastic. But we just got hit with another round of changes, what I would assume is our last round of changes on the PTR. So we're on there, we're going to be playing about with the new set bonuses, how that changed, and really how things seem to be shaping up, because they shook the boat a little bit, which could be very interesting. So we're going to start with Marksmanship, look at all that, and then we'll go to Beast Mastery, and then go to Survival, and see how everything is looking. So Marksmanship obviously had a very powerful set bonus, which has been reined in a little bit. So the 2 set is still every 35 focus you spend, reduces the cooldown of True Shot by 1 second, but then True Shot also reduces the cost of all your focus spenders by 15%, all the way down from 50%. So obviously that means we can't squeeze quite as many aim shots into our opener as we could before. But that does mean that the 4 set isn't impacting the 2 set as much as it was previously, so I don't know if that's, something to be excited about. But this means our legendary boots are still going to be quite valuable, because anything relating to True Shot is going to be an increase in damage, so obviously the quicker we get that back, the more we get into that reduced focus, uptime and the increased damage, and it's all just going to kind of snowball. So expect those to be still quite good. I don't think the nerfs really affect that too much. Our second legendary is probably going to be these hands for the movement, as well as the 15% crit chance on that next aim shot. I think the movement there really is key. So with both the boots and the gloves, with those 2 legendaries, we can basically wind burst into our rotation, and watching for those vulnerables, we can move every other aim shot, which is kind of crazy actually, especially considering going into the Nighthold, one of the weaknesses for Marksmanship Hunter is that we don't have the mobility. With those gloves, we get so much mobility compared to not having them, it's actually kind of ludicrous. So I'd imagine those 2 legendaries will be your go-to, and Marksmanship is looking not so great compared to what it was, but obviously that 4 set was pretty damn broken, so we'll have to see with the sims and how the fights kind of play out, whether we're allowed to play Marksmanship, I guess is the point, because if we're allowed to stand still, and if we're allowed to turret and get off these very specific windows of damage, I do think Marksmanship is going to be ahead of Beast Mastery almost no matter what. If we're not allowed, if the mobility requirement is too high, then we go to Beast Mastery. So, by the way, if you're curious about what talents we're currently running with, Sidewinders definitely seems like a contender. If not a requirement, it's definitely a contender. You will be able to play with Sidewinders. You might be able to play without it. That is going to be strictly numbers game, and that's honestly going to be how many targets we can hit with Sidewinders. If we can hit more than 1 target with Sidewinders, it might be the default again. The power here is that it still applies vulnerable. So instead of really caring about Mark Shot, because Mark Shot doesn't do a great deal of damage compared to Aim Shot, we can literally just constantly open these vulnerable windows with Sidewinders, and you just don't have any real downtime where you can't open a Sidewinders or Windburst window. It's kind of annoying. I honestly didn't want to play Sidewinders, but we'll see how it pans out. If we can play without Sidewinders, that will definitely be my go-to. But when we get the final numbers for everything to do with 7.1.5 when it's on live servers, we'll have a guide come out to show you exactly what we'll be playing around with. So let's go to Beast Mastery, and we'll swap about our gear again, so we're not using Marksmanship legendaries, because there's a new contender, really, a new top dog in town for Beast Mastery, which honestly is kind of crazy. Now, without this, Beast Mastery doesn't really seem to play all that well, and what I love about this is that you can start playing around with your talents quite a bit, so more becomes relevant, I guess, and we've also had quite a few buffs here. So Big Game Hunter has gone up to the 60% chance on targets above 80%. We had Where the Cobra go up to 10% for every pet or guardian. We had Chimera Shot go up quite a bit of damage. I believe it's something like 180% scaling to 280% scaling, so that's a pretty big increase, but still doesn't really seem to do anything when compared to Stomp. So I mean, that seems to be weird. Like, it seems to do the same damage on 2 targets and then less in every other situation. So why would you ever not pick Stomp? And then we also have one with the pack. This is from 15% up to 30%. So this actually makes it so that this passive gives you a 50% chance to reset the cooldown on Dire Beast with crit auto shots, which can be absolutely ludicrous with the new legendary, which gives you 2 charges. It really is quite powerful. We also have a buff to blink strikes, putting that up to 100% from 50%. That might see a lot of use in anything with constant AoE. I can see that pulling ahead of Bestial Fury in a lot of Mythic Plus, especially if it's higher Mythic Plus, and you have plenty of people to take care of the single target damage. And then we also have a weird change to Barrage, where I really don't think this is going to be used on single target anymore for almost any spec, which is really good to see, because Barrage on single target feels kind of weird anyway. You know, it's a huge AoE. Why is it the best on single target? So we'll stick with the Murder of Crows pretty much through everything for single target. And then we didn't really have a great deal of changes here. Aspect of the Beast got a little bit of a buff, but we're never really going to use it. So that's a bit weird. But what I do like is that if you get these legendaries with Beast Mastery, it starts playing so much better. So we'll equip the shoulders, which give us +1 charge of Dire Beast. And we'll also probably use the Bestial Wrath belt. I know it's either going to be the belt or the ring, chances are. I don't think the aspect is powerful enough with this nerf as well for the Call of the Wild braces. So that's going to be a numbers game, probably between the ring and the belt. The belt feels pretty good because of the focus reduction. We'll look at the set bonus actually, because this changed. So 2-piece is an additional 8 seconds, which is absolutely huge. So that means that you only really need 3 Dire Beasts to reset the cooldown on Bestial Wrath instead of 4, meaning you'll get that back so much quicker. And then when you use Bestial Wrath, all of your currently summoned Dire Beasts gain 50% increased damage for 15 seconds. So that's down from the 100%. But the way that this works is that when you have Bestial Wrath active, for 15 seconds, any Dire Beast that you had summoned or will summon gets that damage bonus. So that works on all Dire Beasts regardless of when they were summoned, as long as you have Bestial Wrath active, yes. So that's just huge compared to what it was before. It's no longer restricting, and honestly it's kind of broken with this legendary. So the legendary shoulder gives us charges of Dire Beast instead of a cooldown, which lets us go crazy. So we can pretty much pop everything and then into 2 Dire Beasts. I mean, look at the cooldown of Bestial Wrath already. That's ridiculous. And then for every reset we get, it just gets more and more ludicrous, to the point where we now have Bestial Wrath off cooldown if I use that. And then we'll throw a few more Dire Beasts out. Obviously this fully depends on your resets, but the way that I've got it set up right now is to actually exploit that. So we've got charge after charge after charge here with Dire Beasts, and you can only get that above 80% health, which makes it very powerful for any boss which you need to push a first phase. So the reason that we're getting reset is because we have one with the pack, which then bumps up to 50% on an auto crit, and then we also have Big Game Hunter, which puts my auto crit chance up at 80%. So almost every second auto shot should give a reset of Dire Beast, which with the shoulders is honestly just broken. So I love that that changes your talent choices, but we're going to have to see once again with simulations and numbers and obviously how the fights actually work to see if that's viable, what's viable, what we can play with, and what actually edges out on top. But I really like that it opens up different talent pathways. I think that's very valuable, and I think that's what should really happen almost across all the specs of the game. Now, this means that Beast Mastery, if you get that shoulder legendary, you can probably push yourself to be very competitive with Marksmanship, especially on high mobility fights. As I say, Marksmanship is probably going to be the top for the fights where we can play it, but if there's too much mobility required and we're moving around way too much, then Beast Mastery might poke ahead, and it's definitely going to poke ahead if you do get that legendary. Obviously, relying on a legendary sucks and feels absolutely terrible, but if you get it, you can probably happily play Beast Mastery. Now, let's have a quick look at Survival. This one changed just a little bit, but it did change. So the 2 set changed, and Flanking Strike now has 3 times normal chance to trigger Hunting Companion. So instead of the 2 times, it now has 3 times, meaning 3 times your mastery. So the chance of Flanking Strike giving you a Mongoose Bite is getting up to guaranteed. So let's get our pet out here, and I'll show you how fun this can be. Let's swap our legendaries back. I'm not entirely sure what we'll be using for Survival. not a great deal of good options. I mean, we can use the braces to get our Aspect of the Eagle back quicker, which is probably going to be one of the better ones, and then from there, I'm not entirely sure. Honestly, everything kind of has its place. Obviously, depending on if you've got ads, if you've got AoE, if you just need single target, if you're relying on stat stick. I mean, Pride Az could probably be a pretty good contender now simply because of the shield and it being so powerful. But regardless of that, we get so many charges of Mongoose Bite, it's kind of ridiculous. Especially if you have a lot of mastery. And the thing about our 4 set is that we're going to want to get to 6 charges as often as possible for that damage boost from your 4 set, the 20% damage whenever you get to 6 stacks. So as long as you're hitting 6 stacks reliably, and you can do it quite often, and honestly you will be able to if you get this set bonus, you might be in a pretty good place as survival, especially with all the damage buffs coming into all the spells individually. So if you can weave your spells as nicely as possible, if you're capable of playing survival, you might actually be competitive in a melee spot after 715, as long as you have reasonable gear, simply because that set bonus is going to increase your damage quite significantly. And then there's also this trinket here. Now, for Marksmanship, this trinket reduces True Shot. For Beast Mastery, it's Aspect of the Wild, but for Survival, it's Aspect of the Eagle, and arguably that is probably the strongest cooldown of the 3 specs, simply because you get that huge damage increase and it ties in so well to your Mongoose Bites. So if you get your hands on this trinket, you could have a ridiculous cooldown on Aspect of the Eagle. Once again, this is relying on getting gear to make the spec viable, but a trinket is a lot easier to get than a legendary, a specific legendary at that as well, although I'm not entirely sure how survival is going to play without all that kit. Getting there might be a little bit difficult, but if you do, you'll probably be in a much better spot than you have been this entire expansion, which is really nice to see. We might actually see some decent survival hunter damage coming out on the rankings, which, you know, I love to have Marksmanship as the best spec, that is what I play, but if there are other options out there for different types of fights, I'll happily swap around and play what is best. But that's it for this video. If you have any questions or queries, please leave them in the comment section below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.